This is Paul Henley with NewsHour from the BBC World Service. The US travel ban on citizens of 7 countries that was a key part of President Trump's election campaign finally undergoes a crucial test today in America's Supreme Court. The latest version of the controversial ban excludes about 150 million people from Iran, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Somalia and North Korea, as well as officials from Venezuela. And the case is being called an historic test of presidential power. Oral arguments are happening today with a judgment expected by the end of June. The future of the ban depends on how the court answers 2 questions: whether it exceeds the president's authority over immigration matters and whether it violates the Constitution by favouring one religion over another by targeting Muslim-majority nations. On the campaign trail, the then-candidate Trump was clear about his desire to implement a ban.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
And in June 2017, as president, he tweeted, "That's right, we need a travel ban for certain dangerous countries, not some politically correct term that won't help us protect our people," close quotes. Corey Brettschneider is a professor of political science at Brown University and a visiting professor of law at Fordham, both universities in the US. He helped write one of the many so-called amicus briefs submitted to the court in support of the challenge to the ban. We caught up with him in DC before he set off for the hearing. Now, the government says the president has broad authority over immigration, including the power to block non-citizens from entering the states. I asked him what was wrong with that.
Although the president is right that the court will defer to some extent to his judgment, there's a limit when it comes to his judgment. He has no ability to make policy based on unconstitutional animus. That's the court's term for bad motivations that are basically prejudicial. And in this case, the motivation for the travel ban in its first through third iterations is clearly anti-Muslim animus, and under the current doctrine, that's unconstitutional.
Well, the government also argues it's clear the order does not discriminate against Muslims because it stems from a review by several government agencies concluding that the countries included either weren't providing enough information to allow the government to vet travellers or presented other risk factors. What do you think of that?
Well, that's counteracted by the president's repeated own statements, of course, during the campaign, but also significantly after he took the oath of office, where he said he preferred, for instance, the less politically correct version of the ban. And the best evidence was given by his advisor, Rudolph Giuliani, who said that the president had this Muslim ban and asked him to make it legal, meaning that, yes, it's a Muslim ban, but we're going to come up with reasons to hide that. And that's exactly what this third ban does. It adds North Korea, for instance, which has had so few people come into this country. There's no need for anything like this ban. And it's an attempt to hide what all Americans know who have been paying attention, which is that this is really a Muslim ban, and they're coming up with reasons to try to mask this anti-Muslim animus.
Well, the government is also arguing that any evidence based on the president's tweets should be disregarded because it's irrelevant. The tweets you're talking about, which refer to a Muslim ban. We spoke to Josh Blackman, who's a law professor at South Texas College of Law, who said he thought it'd be dangerous to take such things as those tweets into consideration. Listen to this.
So as a general matter, things the president says on Twitter or in a speech are official statements of the executive. So I don't have a problem with tweets in general. But in the context of reviewing this national security policy, the court's review should be very deferential. And they should really be limited to what is the actual policy saying. And if the policy provides a facially neutral and legitimate reason, then that's the end of the court's inquiry. So I don't think there's any occasion to look at the president's Twitter in this case.
Does that mean you think the court should uphold the ban?
I do. I think this is an uncommonly silly policy. I don't think it'll do much to keep us safe. But the president has both the statutory and the constitutional authority to engage in this action, and the court should uphold it.
Aren't you worried of the implications of letting what a lot of people see to be a racist ban stand in law?
The American people elected Donald Trump, and they elected someone who made these statements. I don't think these statements do provide the motivation for this policy at issue. I think it's different than what he promised in the campaign trail. But this is a political decision. And I think the president's party will likely pay a price at the ballot for these sorts of political decisions. I don't think it's for the courts to make these sorts of decisions to stop it.
Aren't you worried that endorsing President Trump's apparent approach to his presidential powers could be dangerous?
I actually have the opposite worry. I think putting restraints on the powers the president can be more dangerous, not only for this president, but all future presidents. If courts start scrutinizing every time a president makes a national security justification and asks, is this a good enough reason to have it? I think that puts the courts in a very precarious place where they haven't been before.
That was Josh Blackman from South Texas College of Law. Corey Brettschneider, what do you make of those arguments, starting with the one about disregarding the president's tweets?
The current law and doctrine of the Equal Protection, Free Exercise, and Establishment Clause all make it very clear that intent matters. If we want to know whether a policy is legitimate or not, as Josh puts it, we need to know whether or not the motivation is based in animus, because by definition in our doctrine, if policy or a law is based in unconstitutional animus, it's not legitimate. So that's what the tweets do. They show us the president's motivation in a very clear and obvious way, as he acknowledges they are official statements, and they make it clear that the purpose of this ban is exactly what the president and, again, his advisors say. It's to discriminate against Muslims who want to come into this country, and that's unconstitutional under our various clauses.
And if the Supreme Court does decide this case based on what the Constitution is, how important is that decision? What are the implications?
If the court, as it should, says that this policy is based on animus, that would just expand and reiterate precedents from these other clauses that say prejudice has no place in American public life. Contrary to what Josh says, future presidents need to be taught the lesson that prejudice has no place in our Constitution. That's my worry if the court didn't act here. We have to send a clear message, not just to future presidents, but to all public officials, that prejudice has no place in our public life, even if you're an elected official.
Which way do you think the court will go?
I'm counting on Justice Kennedy. I was part of putting a brief together that aims to try to convince him that his doctrine, the animus doctrine, clearly applies in this case, and that he should rely on that doctrine to strike this third iteration of the Muslim ban down.
That was lawyer Corey Brettschneider of Brown and Fordham Universities, and that was the latest edition of NewsHour.